Welcome everybody. My name is Dr. Michelle May and I'm the founder of Am I Hungry? Mindful Eating Programs and Training. I'm so glad that you're joining us for this webinar, New Insights into Treatment for Binge Eating Disorder. This event is being co-sponsored by the Am I Hungry? Mindful Eating for Binge Eating Program and the Women's Center for Binge and Emotional Eating at Green Mountain at Fox Run, two organizations that are passionate about helping people with BED heal their relationships with food and their bodies. I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Carrie Anderson. Carrie has treated eating disorders for 25 years with an emphasis on binge eating disorder. I had the opportunity to work with her on clinical research that led to the development of the Am I Hungry? Mindful Eating for Binge Eating Treatment Program and our book, Eat What You Love, Love What You Eat for Binge Eating. Carrie joined Green Mountain at Fox Run in 2014, creating the Pathway Program for Binge and Emotional Eating. She now serves as their executive director. Welcome, Carrie. I'm so thrilled to have you share what you know about binge eating and new insights for all of our listeners today.
Thank you so much, Michelle. It's a pleasure for me to be speaking today, especially for these sponsoring organizations. I have been working with both of them in developing binge eating programs, and I really appreciate their support for my personal and professional passion for better treatment for those that suffer for binge eating. So I'm going to get started today. And I want to go over our learning objectives. I came to these objectives today because I felt they were the most important new insights in my work. Most recently, I've been working exclusively with this population of binge and emotional eating, and so these are some of the things that I feel that have kind of risen to the top in the last 5 years as things us as professionals working with this population should really take into consideration. So I'm going to explain why the focus on weight loss can interfere with the long-term recovery and how to shift that focus toward recovery and well-being. I also will be describing why the therapeutic relationship, the setting where treatment takes place, as well as ongoing safe support systems are really essential for this treatment. And then lastly, I'm going to explain why an emphasis on establishing self-care, most importantly mind-body practices, are key for sustaining recovery. I want to first do a review in terms of the key components to binge eating treatment. I'm not going to be speaking on the basics, but I want to just review that I feel are the two primary treatment methods that are important when treating binge eating. And the first is dialectical behavioral therapy. The reason why I believe that a DBT is really the best treatment for this disorder is one, that the dialectics challenge the dichotomous thinking that is so prevalent with this population. This idea of being on a diet or off a diet, that they are either eating good food or bad food, or in fact, depending on how they eat, they're either good or they're bad. So dialectics is a beautiful way to help them think more in terms of mostly and sometimes, or either or. It is not part of their thinking process, that we try to get them to think both and. And so this is really part of the healing. In fact, one of the most important interventions that we have with people with binge eating is to jump off what I call the diet wagon and the diet mentality. That's very hard to do, but that's very primary to this in terms of, I really feel that those times that people are on off of a diet are the most destructive times, and they do more damage when they're off their diet preparing to get on the next diet than if they had never been on a diet before. So this dialectic is really important. And also, dialectical behavioral therapy balances the validation with change methods. This is an increasingly more shameful disorder as our society gets more focused on the thin ideal and especially the scare tactics of the obesity epidemic, they are really feeling shame to the core. And in order to welcome them and to make them feel safe, in order to for us to introduce change methods, we really have to always be thinking about validating, especially the function of the disorder. I always say to everybody, I totally understand why you would want to binge eat. It makes all the sense in the world to me. And then learning from them what those purposes are or the functions of that binging does. Also, DBT is considered an affect regulation model. And most definitely, this is something that they need to feel competence in their ability to manage their energy states, their mood states, without using food. So food and eating is a really powerful modulator. It works very well. I'm going to talk about it a little bit later in this slideshow, but we need to really help them feel empowered in their own self-regulation. And DBT does this. Mindfulness is also taught to counteract the dissociation. The binge episode and the binging, the act of binging, is really quite an escape and often considered a dissociative state. In order for them to be able to remove themselves from that behavior that is so ego-dystonic to their own value system. They're doing exactly what they don't want to do. And so dissociation really helps in this process. And it, of course, helps with their mood regulation and shutting their minds and the critical voice off. But mindfulness is really how we counteract that and keep them more present. And then lastly, with DBT, we have behavioral self-monitoring as well as skill enhancement, but using not monitoring food logs, but monitoring their behaviors, their emotions, and tracking, and most importantly, without judgment, when there's a binge or emotional eating episode, to be able to do an analysis of really looking at where the cue occurred, what made them vulnerable, and what are some of the interventions that they could do to stop this chain reaction. And so I've just felt that the DBT model is really the most important model when treating this disorder. Now, the research supports that as well. Not only have there been several researchers that have done studies with using DBT with binge eating, but the model that Michelle and I used in our 10-week program was also based on the DBT concepts. The second thing that I think is important is key to treatment in review is that the delivery of the interventions should be used through a motivational change strategy. And this really has to do with the shame level and the fear and the resistance to change. And I think it's important that all of the interventions that we do come through the lens of what I subscribe to, and that's the self-determination theory. And this theory is based on the concept one's primary needs of autonomy, competence, and relatedness are being met, and that if they're being met, the need for eating psychopathology is not necessary. So the goal in all of our treatment would be to increase the client's feelings of autonomy and competence with their food, and also establish support networks that they can get their needs met. In this chart, what I've done is I've interfaced self-determination theory with eating regulation. And this is this chart goes from left to right. And what we're looking at here is how we approach the food and eating. And many times people say it's not about the food, and the food isn't part of the treatment. But I think that it is about the food in many ways, and that we need to really heal that psychopathology around eating and food, and also bodies, and I'll get to that as well. So if we look at controlled eating versus autonomous eating, what we're looking to do is shift from its focus to a health and well-being focus. And so that's part of my first point and objective, is that weight focus and how do we get them thinking more health and wellness. But the other thing that's important is to really move toward a more flexible model that's not measurements and ounces and grams and calories, and get out of the rigid rules around eating, and that we're taught to avoid food or to be afraid of food. In fact, most of the diet models are do eat this and don't eat that, and that their food is to be feared. And with this model, we're wanting people to feel empowered to approach food with wonder and excitement, and to add things that make them feel better, rather than to focus on things that they can't have. So we want to focus on the things that they can have, and add things. So it's really more of a positive approach and a healing toward food. And most diets are all about quantity. I can remember so many of my clients bring home food from Diet Center or whatever in a bag, and this is what I get to eat for a week. And that's the diet mentality. But what happens is that they eat it even if they hate it, because this is all I get. This is my portion. And that really instills this feeling of deprivation and fear. And so we like to get them more focused on the quality of the food. In fact, through mindful eating, people will actually choose not to eat foods if they don't like it. And that's really a victory when it comes to this model. And so we're looking for a sense of vitality and feeling good. As Michelle says, it's like it's not about being good, it's about feeling good. And so that's really what we try to do with this shift. And lastly, with any motivational theory, we're really trying to get them to want to change from the inside out, rather than feeling that they have to change. So this brings me to that's really just, in a nutshell, the basics. So those of you that have not been familiar with the treatment methods that I use or that we've been using in this industry, I just wanted to give you that baseline. So now I'm going to talk about, again, why the focus on weight loss can interfere with the long-term recovery, and how we can shift and get them focused more on their health and well-being. So something that I've learned about the realities of this population is that those that have binge eating disorder may not identify with having an eating disorder, but they definitely are focused on losing weight. Many people, even if they see the symptoms of the disorder and they may have even been diagnosed with the disorder, not many like to self-identify as having binge eating disorder. There are some that do, and they feel a relief that there's a name for this and that I'm not alone. But 40% of the people who are seeking professional weight loss, this also is bariatric types of interventions, do have binge eating disorder, and this population is the population that need us most. As I'll go on and talk about how the focus on weight loss or losing the weight is really something that aggravates the disorder. And so those folks are getting caught in this perpetual cycle of losing the weight, gaining the weight, losing the weight, gaining the weight, and feeling more and more shame. And they might not walk into our doors. They might not be seeking out eating disorder treatment. So we need to somehow fish in their pond. We need to somehow be able to make our approach attractive to them. And then the other thing that I find happens with this population is that the therapeutic approach, or like for instance mindful eating, just becomes another diet. Well, I'll start mindful eating on Monday. Or I'm not mindful eating now, but I'm going to be mindful eating when I'm ready, maybe after the holidays. But this approach is really a way of being, and it's a daily lifestyle and a thought process, and it's not something that you go on and off. And some will sabotage this by looking at it as another diet. And then lastly, even if they understand that their weight is only a symptom of the problem, they want that symptom gone. And so even though we may not be focused on the weight as the issue and the weight as the goal, we need to be having dialogue with them because they will continue to think this and we're not going to be aligned in the treatment process. So why does thinking about weight and wanting to lose weight not work? Why is it so much of a problem? And the reason is that anytime that somebody wants to lose weight, they engage what we call the restrictive voice. And the restrictive voice is one of those things, as far as they start to pull up into restriction, and I'm talking about restriction in the sense of not just physical restriction of food, but mindset. And those with binge eating disorder have a very strong restrictive voice. So let's just imagine with this pendulum is that we're pulling toward restriction, and it creates this feeling of deprivation, emotional, physical deprivation. And what happens with binge eating disorder is there's this pretty drastic, what we call counter-regulation process, where that once we pull into restriction, it counteracts into a binge process. And it really is coming from this strong sense of deprivation, and any type of thought processes toward weight or restriction is going to activate that, and it's going to activate the binge as the solution. They're just trying to take care of themselves. I wanted to share this with you because the research study that we did with the Mindful Eating for Binge Eating clinical trial, after a one-year follow-up, we found some interesting results. And what we found is, if you look at this graph, what's happening here is the first and second dots that are plotted on the graph have to do with the reduction in the scale for the binge eating scale, meaning the points. They went from a severe binge eating to a non-binging process. If you can see, 17 and under on the left-hand side would be a non-binging state. So and 30 and over would be severe. So what's happening is in the 10-week study, they actually, in 10 weeks, they dropped to a non-binging state. And this is what the research is showing, especially with interventions such as DBT. But after 1 year, those that continued in using the concepts that were taught in the 10-week program actually continued to reduce their scores on the binge eating scale, and they continued to stay in a non-binging state. But interestingly, the smaller population of those that went back to dieting and went back to restriction, what happened is not only did they not they must have had a history of dieting, they returned to dieting. These are some of the variables that we're trying to tease out with this research. But what we do know is that there was a rebound in the binge eating scale. And so what we know is there's something different about the population that is focused on weight. And those that have taught this Mindful Eating for Binge Eating program, the facilitators and the therapists that we have, they'll say that this is something that continues to occur in terms of their focus. So how do we move them from a non-binging, how do we move them from a weight focus to a non-weight focus? And the first thing, and I think I talk about it way too much, so I'm really passionate about it, but we have to validate their desire to lose weight. Some of us avoid talking about weight as clinicians, and the reason we do is we're afraid we're going to reinforce a weight focus, that we're somehow, by talking about it, we're going to endorse it or say that it's okay. And yet, I subscribe, I know that Michelle subscribes, Green Mountain does, to the Hayes method, which is, I put the website here, is the sizediversityandhealth.org. And essentially, what we're saying is that we're weight neutral, meaning that if somebody gains weight or somebody loses weight as part of our treatment, that it's not good or bad. There's no judgment there. And so sometimes, because we subscribe so closely to the size acceptance messages, that if we are forcing our agenda too soon, and this just is a readiness for change, they may interpret that as they don't get it, especially for clinicians that really appear to the patient or the client as having a normal weight. They're going to detach and they're not going to bond there if we don't try to bridge that. And then again, the essence of validation is really communicating to them that we understand their feelings and their thoughts. We understand what's going on in terms of their desire to lose weight. Here's an infographic that explains why the focus on weight isn't working. Green Mountain has this on their resources page. There's the web address there. You can download this PDF and you're free to use this. But essentially, it really talks about why scales harm and how it interferes with the overall goal of overeating, and how it triggers more weight gain than it does weight loss. And if you can educate your client on these facts, like 95% of dieters regain the weight they've lost and sometimes more within 3 years, and we can talk about that the physiological and the psychological effects of weighing themselves and focus on weight actually creates metabolic and hormonal changes in the body just through the fear response that's going to really work against them when they're so focused on this. So if we can help them to understand, not necessarily that they have to completely stop thinking about weight loss. It just means that that's not going to be their focus, and that we're going to help shift them to a place where that's not the first thing in their mind. You know, with mindfulness, we understand that thoughts don't go away. We just notice them and they go into the background, and we decide whether we're going to attach to that or not. So the first shifts that I do is try to help them focus on more of their healing process and wellness rather than getting focused on the weight. And so the first thing is just a shift. In fact, I call it psychological judo. Psychological judo is a concept that I learned in graduate school. It basically means that you take their passion and their energy, instead of blocking it and denying it, that you take it and you move it, use their energy and move it towards something more positive. And judo, of course, they're going to land on their back behind you, but that's the idea, is not blocking that. So the motivational path, we're trying to move them toward this motivational path of, and I talk to them about 2 different types of motivation that encourages them to get involved with starting to change. And that's introjected motivation and external motivation. And just quite simply, unfortunately, so many are motivated by their own guilt and self-loathing, that they wake up and they say, I just absolutely can't stand myself, to the point where they can even have suicide ideation and that I can't live like this anymore. And then secondly, they're motivated to get started in a program because they're looking to focus on a goal or an outcome that's important to others or to themselves. So their doctor's saying, their family's saying, or they saying, I want to lose 50 pounds before my next birthday. But in order for them to have success, we need to move them to a more inside-out focus of internal motivation, where we focus on the experience, the state of being that's reinforced by their choices that's within their control. For instance, I'm feeling happier, I have more energy, I can walk further without pain. And so one of the sayings that we have is really to pay attention to the twinkle lights along the way, the wonder, the daily experience through mindfulness, rather than be really focused on getting to the floodlight or the spotlight if they're, as the reward. So mindfulness is the gap that bridges the gap from external to internal motivation. And mindfulness really supports experimentation and curiosity, feedback, and choice. So mindfulness-based approaches really are to simply observe the feelings and experiences and to take charge of their own decisions. They disengage the sleepwalking, the dissociation, and encourage present moment awareness without judgment. Again, the twinkle lights rather than the floodlight. So I'm going to take a break here before I go to the next concepts, and if anybody has any questions, we might take a couple of them.
Thanks, Carrie. All right, so a couple of questions have come in here. Back to the issue around, let me just read the question. What exercises can you do to assess whether a person wants to change versus is just working with you because they feel like they have to change, aside from just asking them?
Well, it's I would suggest getting some training if you have it through motivational interviewing. And motivational interviewing actually is more of the practice of the higher level theory of self-determination theory. They kind of shake hands from the bottom up on the top down. And so basically you would do some questioning as to what, learn as much as you can about them. Become a study of them. Be curious of what their thought processes are, what their life values are, and their goals. So it's really relationship and having, and really having a good relationship. And really the first few sessions need to be more focused on the therapeutic bond. I don't have, honestly, the BES, the binge eating scale, it measures attitudes and behaviors. Interestingly, somebody can come in to treatment and have been in a restrictive mode, meaning I haven't been binging. They haven't binged for months. They're riding high, and they come in and they say, I just wanted to do this treatment because I don't want to gain the weight back. But they are sky high in the severe range in the binge eating scale. And the interesting thing is that it really picks up those attitudes of restriction and body image disturbances. So it's more comprehensive with attitudes and behaviors. So that would be, I would also use the BES, and that's available. That's a free, you don't have to pay for that assessment, and you can get that download. I think that we even have it on Michelle's site, or you can just go to online and Google it and can get the BES.
Yeah, it's located on amihungry.com. If you just search for binge eating scale, they can take it, or you can share it with your clients. Kelly said, so do they know we will be helping them shift their mindset? This is an area I really get stuck, not throwing in my health at every size beliefs too soon.
I think that it's one of those things that a dialectic about, balancing validation with change, and one of the things with that is just to remember that you have to listen in your conversations for change talk or little nuggets, because if you start to introduce it, you'll see it. You'll see the resistance. There'll be a lot of but, and and one time I did it. I make that mistake too. So give yourself some grace, because one time I said to somebody, I said, well, what if we were not to think about losing weight? What if we were to just focus on health right now? And she just burst into tears and was sobbing. And as soon as I just listened and gave her that space and asked her, tell me what's going on. And she says, I couldn't even fit in the airline seat to get here. Meaning that I needed to listen more to her pain. Her message to me was, it's so awful to be me. I hate myself, right? And so I needed to give her that space and just say, tell me what that's like when you walk onto an airplane and you know you're not going to be able to fit in the seat. Tell me what it's like when people are staring at you, hoping, please don't sit by me, please don't sit by me. These are traumas, and we need to really listen. So I think just giving them their space and then listen for change talk, and then you can push in that direction just ever so slightly. And so I'll say you don't have to stop wanting to lose weight. Let's just shift what we're doing right now. I hope that helps.
Yeah. Yep, and there are several questions related to this. I see this a lot as well. I did write an article, I don't know if you saw it, Carrie, called Mindful Eating and Weight Loss. It's on amihungry.com that addresses a lot of these questions. So we'll share that link along, and this is related to another question. Several people asked if this was being recorded.
Okay.
It is,
Okay.
and we will share the link to this recording, and I'll share the link to that article because it addresses a lot of these issues. I know this is something a lot of us struggle with. We have some other great questions, but maybe we should get back to the presentation so that we get through your content.
We've got 2 other sections to go through, so thank you.
All right, great. Thanks, everybody. Keep your questions coming. We'll hopefully we'll get to some of them as we go through this.
All right, so the next insight that I wanted to bring up was describe why the therapeutic setting, the relationship, as well as ongoing safe support systems are essential for treatment. And I think that this is one of the areas that is really dear to me because we have always, in the programs that I've designed, we've created what we call closed groups, meaning that those people that start the program stay together and in the program together without having people continually joining and disrupting the safety of the group. And secondly, I only work with a homogeneous group, meaning I only work with binge eating disorder and even work with people that struggle with weight. So, and I know that that's not true of all binge eating, but I'm going to tell you why I think it's important. So this is our brain, and we have to really realize how stress affects the brain. And the more that I learn about neuroscience, the more that I study this stuff, the more I'm convinced that this really is a stress disorder more than anything. And I think that if we can solve that issue, I think that the symptom of overeating and binging could go away. So our brains are wired for survival. So any real or perceived threat will be met with fight, flight, or freeze. This population tends to freeze. This idea of escaping and binging and dissociating is a freeze response. The more and more these folks isolate themselves from society and kind of freeze in their apartments or their homes on the weekend, this really is a response to stress. Our clients are often too anxious, too angry, too ashamed, and they find them too tired and find themselves unable to balance their sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. This idea, this is genetic in many ways. What happens is that some individuals have more of a, what I call afraid, F-R-A-Y-E-D, they are afraid too, but afraid nervous system in the sense that it's really easy for them to pop into a sympathetic nervous system state, and it's very hard for them to return back to baseline to a parasympathetic state. So, and then what happens is fear shuts down their ability to make good choices, because once that happens, they're moving out of their frontal lobe or their executive function. Now that's when they're making their diet plans and their dreams, and they're creating, you know, what they want their life to be like, and what they want, what's important to them. But all that goes away as soon as they hit a place of overwhelm, too anxious, too angry, too ashamed, too tired. As soon as they get into that overwhelm, circuits overloaded, they default to their limbic system, and they react only out of impulsivity. They're not using reason, they're not using their value systems to make those choices. So what happens too, it's interesting, is that we actually are feeding our nervous system. So the feeding process is aligned with the rest and digest system, or the parasympathetic nervous system. So as soon as they start eating, the body systemically starts to calm down because it's shifting. So food is a really good way to calm somebody down and move them back to baseline. So I always say this really works, folks, and I'll explain to them why it does. The other very interesting thing is that feeding is also aligned with the survival of our species, and it signals the body that especially that everything's safe, everything's okay. So it really is something that goes way back into our genes and the existence, that food is survival. And so the body responds, the nervous system responds to it in that way. Basically, I'm safe. So if you think about somebody that's in this feeding frenzy and they're sitting there and they're eating this food, just think about what all the cells in their body are saying, I'm safe, I'm safe. Okay? And so that's why when we start working on some of these other methods, that safety is a real important focus. Now, I had a privilege of hearing Stephen Porges talk about the Polyvagal theory at last year's IADEP, which was in Florida. And I think so many of the clinicians that were in that room that day sat there with their mouths wide open and their jaw dropping and saying, of course, this makes all the sense in the world. And basically he studied the neurophysiological foundations of emotion, attachment, and communication and self-regulation. And the concept of neuroception, which is a subconscious system for detecting threat and safety. So evolutionary development allows for social interactions. It actually stabilizes our physiological arousal. It brings us back to baseline just by using facial expressions, vocal tones, and what we call the gazing effect. Now the gazing effect is that if around our brow, the muscles around our eyebrow and around our eye, the ocular muscles, basically soften when we do an eye-to-eye with somebody we feel safe with and we feel like we're going to make it. Everything's okay. We're loved. And all mammals have this process. And what we're finding, especially with the lack of eye-to-eye, people-to-people contact, what happens is that we feel less and less secure and less safe. Now he also works with Bessel van der Kolk, which is a trauma researcher, and he takes the same theory and he says most of the people that have feeding problems, most, not everybody, probably have some attachment issues, meaning they didn't bond to their primary caretaker, or had a breach of somewhere of the safety bond and the trust bond with another human being. So that's where we see high levels of trauma in this population, high levels of having a difficult time with intimacy and attachment. And essentially then what happens if they're not getting this, what Stephen Porges calls the royal road to affect regulation, if they're not getting that, then they're going to be turning to food. Because food is the other method with the polyvagal theory, the other method to be able to calm somebody and disengage them from the stress response. So this really blew my mind, folks, because I've been working with people for 25 years, and every single person that I've worked with has some sort of communication problem or attachment problem in some way, because they've attached to food. Right? That's safe, doesn't talk back to them, it's not going to harm them. And so basically this theory really invites us as clinicians to radically shift our thought process and the therapeutic approach. Now working with eating disorders as long as I have learned that people that fully recover, if you ask them what was the most significant thing that occurred for you in recovery, and they will say, my therapist. So we're very important in terms of creating that safe space with our facial expressions and vocal tones in order to really create a space for them to share with us, to be able to learn through us how to regulate themselves through relationship. So very important that they have a community of hope, that they surround themselves with people that get them, have a common experience, that they have support systems that support their autonomous decisions and people that trust them, that they're competent to carry out their plans. That's part of self-determination theory. And then also, I think it's very important to weave in interpersonal therapy, or IPT, especially in a group setting, to help heal those interpersonal wounds and to restore connections. So that was a mouthful, but I think that this is something that may have brought up some questions.
Carrie, I have a few people who have hands up, and you're welcome to also use the question or chat window to type your question. Christy, I see that your hand is up. I'm going to unmute you. Go ahead, Christy. Oh, you have your, I'm not able to unmute you. What you need to do, I'll come back to you. What you need to do is find the 2-digit code that's listed on your audio panel and plug that in so that it'll allow me to unmute you, or maybe you have yourself muted. I'm not quite sure. Let's see, Marion Keith. Okay, you're unmuted, Marion.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that. Thank you so much. I didn't really have a question, just thank you. I have been working with a woman with anorexia whose weight has gone up and down, so I am really interested in the similar aspects of, and she's very, very restricting right now, but totally denies binge eating. Is very shameful.
Right.
Anyway, yeah, it's just, it's an interest. I'm just, I don't have that much experience, but I'm interested in learning more. So I'll just, I'll listen. Thank you. And I guess I had hoped for copies of the slides, but actually a recording would be even better. So thank you.
Well, and you also can look up, just Google the Polyvagal theory, and there's a whole booklet that Stephen Porges has that you can download.
Great, thank you. All right, let's see, I thought there was another hand up. Let me double check. I don't see that. Let me check the type window. Randy asks, what is the frequency of sessions that is most effective?
Right. Well, we mostly treat binge eating disorder on an outpatient basis, but in the beginning, I think the more frequent is better. Now, the 10-week program that Michelle and I designed has it was originally designed, and the clinical study was based on meeting twice a week for a couple hours. One was more learning, psychoeducational, and the other was processing. Now, just because of life and people have to travel some distances, sometimes that we've moved that format to more of a 3-hour a week. The key is that they need to have both a group, I believe, a group therapy and an individual session every week. And even better, you know, if you can get into a residential setting. Now, residential inpatient treatments are very expensive, but Green Mountain has what we call a retreat format, where then they get outpatient therapy, and it's a much less expensive venue to do something that's more immersive in terms of just, you know, getting all of this like a shot in the arm. At the same time, you know, most people if you can learn to put into place some of these programs, as long as you get them in at least once a week and have a thorough intake process, like a pre-treatment process, similar to what we do with DBT.
All right. let's let you keep going, Carrie, and I'll come back to some of
Okay.
these questions when we get toward the end here. Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Keep them coming.
Okay, so the next key or insight I have is explain why an emphasis on establishing self-care and mind-body practices are key to sustainable recovery. Now, the reason I've come to this place, and this is all, actually this is going to merge very well with what we've already been talking about, both from the standpoint of shifting off of a weight focus and also from a place of calming the nervous system. So this is kind of, it builds to this third place. But the other thing is I've found people that have gone through a full treatment with me and really made some real strides in their thinking process, and they've done very well to a point. But then when the magic really starts to happen is when they take my advice that they need to start yoga or Tai Chi or some other mind-body practice. And then you start, everything starts to go into motion. And so that's why I'm going to talk about how important that this is. It makes sense in terms of healing body image. It also makes sense in terms of calming the nervous system and being able to get into a parasympathetic state. So I'm going to share a little bit about that. So what we know, and this is also part of Bessel van der Kolk's work, he even says yoga programs help people who are chronically stressed to learn to calm themselves down through breath management and engage in poses that put them in touch with their dissociated bodies. So this is what's moving anything that's going to re-yoke, as in yoke their body to their mind, because those that have binge eating disorder are so detached from themselves. In fact, sometimes they talk about that they're just these big heads walking around and they've just ignored themselves from the neck down. And then, interestingly, breath with rhythmical activities such as drumming. One of the things that we've just introduced to Green Mountain is called Drums Alive, and I want you to look for it out there because there are instructors around the nation doing this. But drumming or body movements that have some flow to it, such as Tai Chi, that can actually shift people out of a disorganized and a fearful brain and heal that process, especially helps heal conditions like ADHD, anxiety, and trauma. And these are just high co-occurring disorders, right, with binge eating. Many of the clients that I see have ADD. Many clients, most of the clients have anxiety, and many have trauma backgrounds. So if we know these types of things can help heal these other disorders, they're all part of the larger process of mending and healing the mind-body. And this actually is learning to train the brain and the brain processes, so there's better executive processing and there's less fight, flight, freeze tendencies. They bring themselves back to baseline. And the other thing is that merging the mind and the body intentionally can also heal one's relationship with their body. And that's through acceptance and forgiveness techniques. This self-compassion is so important, and that they can shift to a self-care process for our clients from a weight focus to a function of their bodies. We use something called body neutrality here, and it's really kind of like the Hayes model in the sense that we try to look at the body not as you know, I like it or I don't like it, or hate it or I love it. And we try to just help them look at it as it's the home they live in. It's from a functional perspective. It can make the difference between feeling good during the day or not feeling good. It can make the difference in terms of just their well-being and movement and functionality. And so we try to get them focused on that rather than trying to force, again, this idea that you've got to love your body. I've been treating eating disorders for 25 years. I don't know very many people that love their body. And and get to the place where they love it. I think they appreciate it. I think they respect it. And I think that's a good place to be. So allowing your body to heal and restore its balance by addressing its responses to physical, emotional, environmental stresses. This is where I say that this disorder is often a stress disorder because it's got so many of these stressors. Listening to the stories, and I'm sure you hear them, but just listening to the stories of what people have been through, even, you know, a year prior to coming into treatment, is horrific. There's losses, there's you know, elder care, there's child issues, they've got children that have disabilities or need special care. I mean, they've got so much on their plates, and so so focusing on their self-care in terms of really trying to keep themselves in a balanced state is going to be so important. And then accepting and not fighting the body. So many people, they come in and they talk about the fight. Now I understand they're talking about the fight in their head in terms of do eat, don't eat, you know, you're so bad, all that nonsense in terms of the dialogue that goes on in our head. But at the same time, they're fighting their body. They're upset at their body because it's betrayed them. And yet, it's the body that's going to lead them into recovery, really, if they really start to heal it. And as it heals from the inside out, then that's when we start to see that beautiful magic in terms of the twinkle lights throughout the day and feeling good about themselves.
Carrie, I lost your audio. Can somebody else type in here? Can you guys hear her? Hey, Carrie, we aren't hearing you anymore. I'm not sure if you got disconnected. Carrie? Hey, Lindsay, if you're listening, can you check in with Carrie and see if she's lost her connection? All right, so Lindsay's calling Carrie. Hey, you're back, I think. Carrie?
You're back?
Yep, you're back. We hear you now.
Okay, so I just unplugged and plugged back in.
Okay, you sound a little far away. It sounds a little different, but we can hear you, so go ahead and proceed.
Okay, let me see if I can you hear me a little bit better now?
Yep, you're fine. Just keep going. You're good. Thank you.
I'm so sorry.
No worries.
How far back did I lose you?
Not just a few moments. I think you just finished up the yeah, you just getting ready to switch slides. So I'd go ahead and continue from where you are.
Okay. Just a second. There's something in my... Okay. All right. So mindful self-care, these are the three areas that we focus in terms of self-care. Predictable and nourishing and mindful eating, joyful movement and mindful activity, and mindful self-compassion and stress management. So it really is a holistic approach to self-care. Obviously, mindful eating for binge eating has been a focus of both the organizations that are sponsoring today. It's important to remember that mindful eating is not just how to eat, and oftentimes people do think that mindful eating is just the act of eating, but really it's being mindful before, during, and after. And in the Am I Hungry programs, we follow a structure of thinking about eating where we go through an eating cycle, which asking yourself why, when, what, how much when you're eating, and then where do you spend your energy from the fuel that you eat. So mindful eating is something, if you're not familiar with mindful eating, really encourage you to look at these models. The other resource would be the Center for Mindful Eating, which is a wonderful organization that has lots of resources as well. So I'm coming back to yoga treatment again, because the reason I'm emphasizing this is because there has been a study specifically with the population of binge eating, and it's the
what we found with people with binge eating disorder that engaged in yoga treatment, they decreased in the quantity of the food they ate. They decreased in the speed of their eating. They improved in their food choices, and they had basically a healthier connection to food, physical self-empowerment, and cultivating a present moment awareness. So all of these things. Now, I understand that some people are just, yoga's not going to be their thing. But interestingly, there are so many types of yoga now, and so many different types of practices, that if somebody has tried it once and they didn't like it, that to look and try something else. And then there's anything that's going to kind of yoke or be a mind-body practice is going to be important. I want to talk about exercise quickly here, and then I'm going to move to the end. Most people with binge eating disorder, if they live in a large body, are what we call exercise or movement resistive. And most of the time it's because they really have this connection with using it as a punishment or for burning calories in response to overeating. And so we really have to shift their whole relationship with moving. They also tend to have problems with mobility and pain. And so really finding somebody that can modify and help them to engage in activities for fun, to reduce stress, that those issues that by living in a larger body occur, that we can make sure that they don't worry about what they have to look like or dress. I just say get some leggings and a big t-shirt, and there you go. I don't really, and also trying to go places that don't have big mirrors, so they're having to be reminded of their body constantly, especially in the beginning. I know that there is exposure that needs to take place, but it could drive them out of even moving at all. So really focusing on play and enjoyment, adaptations, modifications, and really looking at the intrinsic pleasure for exercise. And self-compassion is something, there's now self-compassion therapy. Kristen Neff has some training programs and whatnot, but again, if you look at self-compassion from a mindful perspective, it disengages the fear response, it creates a positive, safe environment for change, it validates somebody's experience, it's how to respond to that automated critical voice, it's how to change the self-talk process, and if we model it as therapists, and even their peers giving feedback until it's internalized, that's something that can really help them to be able to adopt it themselves. And lastly, things like mindfulness-based stress reduction, or MBSR, and other types of meditation are really powerful in terms of the stress response and stress management. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let you ask some more questions. I'm going to put up this resources slide for us right now so that you can see some of the things that are available to you from these sponsoring organizations. But I will take some questions as you take a look at that.
Thank you, Carrie. A couple people have asked about the role of dietitians. I know in the Mindful Eating for Binge Eating program that you and I developed, we encourage a team approach. I know you do at Green Mountain as well. And in the Mindful Eating for Binge Eating program, we have dietitians that teach the psychoeducational component sometimes, and then the therapist is teaching, or conducting the small group therapy or individual therapy sessions. Do you have any other comments or thoughts for dietitians who are obviously seeing binge eating frequently as well?
Well, I guess I take for granted that people are familiar with all eating disorders must be treated by a team, because it's a biopsychosocial disorder, and that includes binge eating. It's the most prevalent eating disorder that there is, even though it may not have the treatment options that the others do. And so I always have teamed up with a dietitian
And I actually see the dietitian as my partner and as a nutrition therapist. You know, they don't just talk about food. They talk about relationship with food. They talk about relationship with body. They talk about all these things that we've gone over today. They support within their scope of practice, but they understand it and support it. So absolutely, I'm thumbs up, 3 thumbs up for a dietitian.
I thought so. I thought so. Somebody asked a quick question. Are you familiar with any research on massage for helping heal that mind-body connection?
Well, I don't know the research. I probably should look for that, but I can't imagine. It's a mind-body practice.
Mm-hmm.
So I can imagine that. I mean, boy, it sounds good to me.
Yep. Yes, definitely, definitely, and just anecdotally, I know that's something you offer at Green Mountain. We do that, offer that at our retreats as well. It is very healing to be able to practice self-care for a body that people may have disconnected from. Let's see, another question here. Oh, I think you addressed that one. She had a quick question about Drums Alive and a weight-neutral approach, something about the instructors burn those calories, something that I've written about as well. Any thoughts about that? Because you obviously sending somebody, even to yoga classes, once in a while I'll end up in a yoga class where the instructor will have that sort of focus.
Right. Well, I've even seen in some of the listservs I'm at are on, it's like yoga for weight loss.
Yeah.
And that's just really misleading.
Mm.
Now, ultimately, there might be some from the inside out healing that goes on, and that might be something that occurs, but the focus on that is completely against what the purpose of yoga would be.
Mm-hmm.
And the purpose. Yes, you know, we're trying to do some training with some fitness organizations such as ACE and some of those training organizations, and really give them a heads up to be what to look for with binge eating disorder, and how things need to be shifted in terms of the way that we approach it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think it's evolving. I think that the message, the weight neutral message, is getting out there. Again, you can learn a lot more if you get involved with the HAES organization or ASDA. At the same time, I think that, as I mentioned before, it's important to kind of bridge that gap and help with the transition with that. But weight neutral, again, just says that it's not good or bad, it's just not the focus.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. And unfortunately, sometimes people will get into more of a weight neutral approach and still not seek healing for their binge eating disorder, you know, feeling that, okay, I just have to accept this the way it is. And the binge eating disorder itself still needs to be, as you always say, you know, that is the priority for treatment. It's not the weight, it's treating the eating disorder. All right, well, we are out of time. Carrie, I want to just thank you, as many people are starting to type in. Thank you for your time and everything you put into this. It was really a great presentation. This session has been recorded so that you're able to share it with your colleagues who weren't able to attend. We'll share those links on social media, and we'll send you an email with those links. In the meantime, I really encourage you to visit amihungry.com and fitwoman.com for resources, many different resources, and to consider us a resource for you in your clinical practice. It was wonderful to have so many people here, and we hope that people are sharing this very important message with their colleagues, their circle of influence, and certainly their patients and clients.
And I just wanted to mention I have my email address up here, carrie@fitwomen.com. And please don't be shy. If you have any other questions, don't hesitate to email me. Give me, you know, sometimes a day or two to get back to everybody, but feel free to do that, because like Michelle said, you know, we're passionate about this population, and we want to be a resource for anybody.
Thank you. Thank you. And we've gotten a couple requests to do more sessions, so I think you'll see more sessions from the two organizations in the near future. So thanks, everybody.
Great. Thank you.